Welcome back. With all the debate over our broadband, clean energy funds and the whole future of our new look economy, who better to comment than a world expert on all these issues, everything from innovation economies to venture capital and private and government investment. Here to tell us all the way from the US is author William Janeway, here to launch his new book, Doing Capitalism in the Innovation Economy. He's here as a guest of the US Study Centre and joins me from our Sydney City studio. Welcome to the show.
Good to be here.
Now, well, actually, the first thing I always like to find something interesting about the guest, not that you don't have a lot, but something people might know. You were awarded an honorary CBE, which in this country we know, a commander of the British Empire.
Yes,
interesting.
I was. I've worked very closely in Cambridge University, where I did my doctorate many years ago, and where I'm now resident again after 35 years of working venture capital. I was co-chair of the first major philanthropic campaign for a British institution. We brought in more than £1 billion for Cambridge, and with government cutbacks, we need it.
Yeah, well, we can sympathise with that. And I guess while we're in the UK and what's happened this week, and given that you have followed what's happened that led us to the GFC, and she is being blamed for part of it on her financial big bang, Margaret Thatcher, what, from your point of view, from what you've looked at world economies, where do you see her legacy in this sense?
Well, the Britain in which she took power was clearly a troubled country with much conflict. And on the other hand, the assault beginning with her administration and then immediately followed in the United States by Ronald Reagan, the demonization of government and the elevation of market fundamentalism carries costs. The fact is that over many generations and successive cycles of new technology, government has played a major role, a constructive and often creative role, both in the upstream process of funding the scientific discovery and invention, and also in the deployment of the new technologies, from the railroads to the internet, that have changed our lives and radically improved living conditions. Demonizing government, making it illegitimate for it to play an active economic role, has costs. And I think we're seeing some of those costs today when the movement towards investing in what I call the next new economy, the low-carbon economy, is pretty well stalled around the world. And there's an irony there, because the way we live today and the way we're learning to use the digital internet-based new economy of the last generation, all of that came out of government investment, government procurement, imaginative and creative government officials interacting with the market economy in an enormously productive way.
Of course, that couldn't be more relevant in two senses to here, and we're not quite as obsessed with getting rid of all government as they are, as the right is in the US, but we're seeing a move towards it. Let's start with the first one. As a man who's been involved in new technology, venture capital in that area, and who, I might add, got out before the tech boom, which is an even better sign you knew what you were doing. What do you make? I don't know if you've had a chance to look at it, but basically we've now got two competing broadband networks. You could say it's good that both parties in our country are going to invest in it, but one wants to spend a lot more and make it world's best. The other says near enough's good enough, we should save the money.
Well, I don't think a visitor to your great country should get himself positioned in a partisan political debate.
I do
have to say, nice try, but I have to tell you, though, that for an American to see the argument being about how much and how fast versus any or none is enormously encouraging. It's heartening. It takes me back to the bipartisan days when I was a little boy, and the Eisenhower Republican administration, with a supporting Democratic Congress, voted to build the interstate highway system on the one hand and to fund the foundations of the computer revolution on the other.
I can see your point of not wanting to get involved, but in general, as somebody who's involved in venture capital and argues about the money, at this point where we're sitting, would you be best to go for the faster speeds and go as great as you can because we don't know where it's going? Or do you think, as you say, so long as you're doing something in this space that's encouraging, that's a good sign anyway?
Well, let me respond this way. There is no limit to the amount of capacity that use of the internet, creative and continuing invention around the internet will suck up and make use of. So from the point of view of economic value over time, I guess I have to say that more is better. Of course, there's always an argument about soon enough is good enough, and measuring the economic cost is not irrelevant. But this is not a case where we're going to find a speed limit on cars or capacity limits. The new capacity, as it is developed and laid down, is going to be taken advantage of. And the more there is, the more creative will be the advantage that's taken.
Just before I get to the other issue you mentioned about the new economy and clean energy, just on tech investment, venture capital in the new economy, what's the key thing you're looking at that we need to know if you were investing at the moment? What would it be?
Well, I think that there are two different, really interesting, really challenging, but profoundly important developments taking place. This is a little technical, but I think it's pretty comprehensible. The proliferation of smartphones, I heard you talking earlier about the cloud, taming and making the cloud mobile architecture suitable for the kind of mission-critical business applications has barely begun. The notion of billions and billions of endpoints accessing information, executing transactions all over the world. Right now, that's pretty much the Wild West. Your Wild West, our Wild West. So there's a lot of work to be done on that. The second thing, which is also beginning to happen, is that computers are really beginning to able to understand not just what we say, but what we mean by what we say. So there's going to be a whole wave of new ways of using computers creatively around their ability to understand as we're speaking right now. There are going to be security implications of that, but there also are going to be both creative and commercial applications, which we can't tell yet. It's still a time of trial and error, as all investing on the frontier of innovation necessarily is.
Well, one of the other big areas that you talk about as the growth area we should be looking at is the investment in clean energy funds. And as you pointed out, government funding has often been, well, is the key to this. Now, you point out that governments come to grief when they try and pick winners. I don't know if you're aware, in this country we've got a proposed clean energy fund, $10 billion. Again, it's a bit political, but what's your advice to governments who are going into this space?
Well, it's an excellent question, and I think there is something to be learned from the last generation on this score. First of all, the U.S. has been the leader in the innovation economy for 100 years, but today leadership is wide open. We're stalled out in the U.S. You can't even talk about responses to climate change in a politically responsible way. With respect to how to take advantage, how to move into this space, I think there are two aspects of how the U.S. government, and really it was instruments of the Defense Department, how they played such a constructive role. The first is funding a lot of research in universities, in research institutions, in corporations, creating lots and lots of overlapping and competing research programs. The second is to be a good customer, to be a creative and collaborative customer for the early designs, the early output, the stuff that's not ready for commercial prime time, that's not competitive in cost, but is opening up a promising new path. And then as a customer, pulling the suppliers, whether they're big companies or startups, down the learning curve to low-cost, reliable production, and therefore commercial competitive ability. I think that proved to be, back in the 60s and 70s, a much better approach than for the government, as the governments in Europe did, trying to identify national champions and picking winners. We've just seen an embarrassment in Washington when, with the best will in the world, and not because they were in any way corrupt, the Obama administration expanded actually a program of the Bush administration for loan guarantees to start-up energy companies, and basically threw away $500 million. When, if that $500 million had been put into a budget to buy innovative new battery technology, solar cells, it would have been a lot more productive.
Well, let's hope the chair of our new Clean Energy Finance Fund, Gillian Broadband, is watching with that advice. And in our last couple of minutes, I'd just like to hear about your new book, which you are launching here. US Study Centre's brought you over. It's called Doing Capitalism in the Innovation Economy. As our economy is going through a transition with a high dollar, manufacturing going, mining boom going, again, what's the message out of that? How do you do capitalism in an innovation economy?
Well, the first half of the book basically is the story of how I learned how it works. I came out of Cambridge as an economist who'd studied under Keynes's students, so I knew that all economic decisions are made under conditions of uncertainty. When you start trying to invest at the frontier of innovation, then you really learn about living with uncertainty. I also learned that what I and my peers and my colleagues and the entrepreneurs we backed, that we were all dancing on a platform that had been constructed by the federal government over that previous 20 or 30 years of building the foundations for the digital economy. I also learned and observed historically that waves of innovation are always accompanied by massive financial speculation. Now, those bubbles, they can be devoted, they can be applied to building beach houses in the Nevada desert or funding explosion in the prices of tulip bulbs, but they can also be applied to the technologies that, when they're built out at scale, change everything. I was the enormous beneficiary of having written my doctoral thesis on 1929 to 31. So in effect, I'd lived with a bubble that burst disastrously and then a following on financial catastrophe.
Unfortunately, we have to leave it there. We've run out of time, but you've given us a good taste for the book. We've got the first half, so people will have to buy it or go to your lecture tomorrow, look up the US Study Centre to find out about the rest. I really appreciate your time tonight. Fascinating.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. That's William Janeway, and the book is called Doing Capitalism in the Innovation Economy. That's it for tonight, but we'll be back again to do it all tomorrow night with our end of week panel. Always fun and games. See you then.